Welcome to Northminster Presbyterian Church here in Salinas, California for our midweek kind of scripture chat, theological chat that we have each week. I'm Pastor Bill, and usually I have a cohort, a partner in crime in there, and that's Pastor Andy. Unfortunately, Pastor Andy is busy this week. He is grading and proctoring ordination exams in the Presbyterian Church, so he's kind of busy reading through exegetical works. So you get me just today. Just a kind of refresher, last week we finished up the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And we introduced to you then a new book that we'd start up here in October, and that's Your Move. And there'll be descriptions down below in there of how to order it and get a copy of it. It's fairly a quick read in there. Today, though, we're not going to talk directly about this book, but this book is about board gaming. Yes, it's a passion of mine, but the subtitle here is What Board Games Teach Us About Life. And we're going to have a conversation this month about board gaming and some of those life lessons that we learned. Maybe we didn't realize that we were learning through board gaming. But I thought we'd take an opportunity today to maybe enrich ourselves a little bit about board games. We probably have all played them, board and card games in there, but do we know where they've come from and some of the history behind it? So I thought it may be just a fun little diversion of doing something a little bit different and talk about board games in general into that, and a little bit of that history about them that may in tune us a little bit more to this book as we read. I am avid board gamer. In fact, this shirt here is the 50th anniversary for Gen Con, one of the largest North America board gaming conventions and competitions in the world. And my collection, about 2 years ago, was somewhere just slightly over 500. And here's a picture of them actually in my Fort Wayne there, that game. You're seeing there's probably still about 50 games you don't see in that particular, but it's my wall of games, as a lot of people like to refer to it as. But let's look first a little bit about the history of board games. And it goes back pretty far. The history of board games goes somewhere around 5000 BC. So when we start to kind of recognize that prehistoric time in there, which means board games is shown to be there before the written language. So what was the first board game, you might ask? Well, it was dice games. Simple dice games. Yeah, some of them were used for gambling, but often they were used to kind of discern about life and our spirituality. And they were carved in a variety of different ways in there. Here's a few pictures. You see at the top there some sticks, which are your simple dice. They make mark on, so there are two-sided dice in there. The bottom picture there is out of bones that were found in Turkey some 5,000 years ago, being buried in there. And then we have some more what looks more like what we think of a six-sided dice that came through in the Roman period of time. So what are some of the old games that are out there? Well, our first one that we know of and have some rules set for is Set T, S-E-N-T, about 3100 BC. Followed by that is about 100 years later. It's a simple roll and move type of a game. We suspect kind of in a circular pattern, working your way to the center, Mehem. And then the Royal Game of Ur. Now this one is equated often as being the most prehistoric and one that we know the most about. In there, we don't have a full rule set, but there is rules that talk about this in there. And that happened about 26,000 BC. From that, we believe checkers came out of. An old game too, and so they kind of blend both those period of times. Following that, it was backgammon. Then the game of Go. Easy game, but very complex strategy game being formed there. Then there's Nine Men Morris, and that game is still in publication today. Several of the others you see in the forums, but the original sort of version of Nine Morris I actually own. I do not own the one that is from the 1400 BC time period there. So Then a game called Toff or Vikings in there. It's kind of a captured game moving across a grid system. And then chess. A lot of people lift up that chess is one of the oldest games out there, but chess is 600 AD in there. There is still this huge, thousands of years board games have been played at this point in time. And chess is an interesting. It was actually developed by emperors for their generals to learn strategies for the battlefield before they would enter into the battle in the Asian area. And they make elaborate. You think of our simple 9x9 chessboards, but they have these huge maps and moving of armies. And this is how they discerned how to attack and defend against intruders. And that's how chess came into being. And the last one, coming more from the African American, is McCall, and that's 700 AD. These are some of the old ancient games. I don't think any of you have any of those on your shelves or any of the original ones on your shelves, though many of you may think that you're as old as dirt. These are much, much older than you in there. But when did board games come to America? Let's look a little bit at the history of those games. We've known that games came probably in the around 1656 in that original Plymouth colony. And in fact, they allowed those games to sort of be played, except games of cards and dice were banned in there. And if you got caught twice, you got a public whipping in there. So cards and dice weren't. So they started to think a little bit further about games in America. In it. And they started to evolve a little bit more in 1765. Yeah, that date should ring a little bit of a bell in there. It's all related to the Stamp Act. If you remember the Boston Tea Party, I don't know if any of you were there, maybe a few of you were, but it's all related to taxation without representation and these stamps that were put on, these seals and stuff that were put on for tax purposes. Well, believe it or not, the Stamp Act reached into the board gaming and into playing cards in there. And so you had to pay a tax on buying playing cards as part of the Stamp Act. You had to pay 1 shilling for a deck of playing cards, and you had to pay 10 shillings, though, for 2 six-sided dice. And this starts an American revolt or a protest. It was more than just tea and crumpets, I guess. So one of our early sort of what would look more like a board game, and this is an image of that, is the New York bestseller F. Lockwood published the first known board game that we think of, and it was titled Traveler's Journey Through the United States. This is the early United States. It's based on, and it was a way of teaching the geography of the new lands that was coming into being in that. And you kind of rolled and moved around and to learn those different areas. Well, the game started then to take on a little bit more twist as more printing happened. And in 1843, William and Stephen Ives from Salem, Massachusetts, published a near exact copy of an earlier English game that taught morality when you played it. This game was called The Mansion of Happiness, and to become a steady seller, and it became a steady seller through the decades. It was how to have happiness in your life. What brought you joy and happiness through doing the right things, the morality aspect of that. It was a huge seller in that. So much so that it spurned on other games. And the next one is from Milton Bradley in there. Became a bestseller, The Checkered Game of Life. And winners of this game were the first persons to accumulate 100 points and to reach what they call the happy old age, while avoiding poverty and the ruins and suicide along the way. Later, the Civil War soldiers actually carried this game, a portable version of this game, probably in cloth roll up in that, as they'd march around, both sides in that. The important thing to note on this is that if you landed on the gambling square in there, your life was ruined and you lost the game immediately. Gambling never pays. Well, that spurred on more games related to life and ethics and how one should be, how we should live out our lives. So much so that in 1910, Elizabeth Magg published a board game she invented in 1904 entitled Landlords Game to promote Henry George's theories on solving inequality in the land of ownership and wealth. Players soon modified this game to emphasize bankrupting other players than prosperity. And eventually, this is the game that evolves into Monopoly. Yes, a woman created a game of Monopoly, which turns out to be stolen by a man. That's right, Darwin, in 1934, sold Monopoly directly to the Wallmakers department store in Philadelphia. There was so much interest that Gimbels and F.A.O. Schwartz wanted the game also. It became a lot of buzz around this game, and eventually Parker Brothers picks up the game, actually for a steal in there, a couple thousands of dollars. Sales skyrocketed. And by 1936, the company could barely meet the demand of this game. People loved playing Monopoly, loved to be the monopolizing, gleefully bankrupting their opponents and gouging them with excessive rent. Couple side notes on Monopoly here. Notice the board here is one of the early boards, and it is round and made out of cloth because you go round and round and round. And in fact, in the book that we're going to read, Your Move, the chapter that we'll talk about next week, and I'll emphasize, is about this game of Monopoly. It probably has the longest history of people today. I remember playing it as a child, playing hours upon hours of Monopoly. My mom remembers Monopoly coming, and them getting a copy, and them playing. It's interesting notes. Monopoly is originally designed to be a 90 to 2 hour game, 90 minutes to 2 hours. It doesn't play that way anymore because there are several rules that we don't play by. Free parking is literally free parking, not the accumulation of hundreds of thousands of dollars. The object is to get rid of money out of the game, not keep infusing in more. Remember, it's about bankrupting everyone else. The second rule is the auction phase. Many people go, what? There's an auction phase? That's right. Every piece of property gets auctioned off. When you land on it, you choose not to buy it, it gets auctioned off. And there are more house rules to Monopoly than there are probably houses in the United States. We make up a whole variety of rules in it. So Monopoly is one of those games that are probably dear to our hearts. And one little side note, Monopoly was used in World War II by bomber pilots. I'll tell you the answer to that next week. But we see as kind of a lackadaisy for probably 60 years of games. They're kind of, in America, these roll and move type of games. Some of them are really blah. Others of them are just, yep, they're chances of luck. But in 1995, Settlers of Catan, one of the first European games to achieve popularity outside of Europe and Germany, comes over to America, and 24 million copies of that series is sold, and it is translated into 30 different languages. It takes off, and it is the catalyst a lot of people equate to of the new board gaming era in the United States. Well, board games hold a rich history in our lives. And for many of us, we can have fond memories of sitting around the kitchen table or dining room table, laughing and sharing with friends and family. So I encourage you this week to pick up this book, Your Move. And in chapter 8 here, I encourage you to read that. That one is about Monopoly, and we're kind of bouncing around a little bit. It's a very quick read of the game, of the book about games, and kind of equate to their lives. Next week, I'll be joined by my partner in crime, Andy Roush, and I look forward to talking to you and hearing about what were some of your childhood favorite games and what games are you still playing today. This is Pastor Bill, and I'll see you next week. Bye.